Let's talk about early echinoderms because honestly, they're some of the coolest fossils out there. So we're gonna be talking about little animals. They're all going to share a couple of traits in common, and these are things you would find in a modern starfish or sand dollar or a modern crinoid, or yeah, even a sea urchin. So what they're going to have is, like in our little example up here, our little mascot for the day, they are going to have a set of plates covering the inner chamber. The plates are going to be made of stereom, Stereom. It's kind of a light, fluffy form of calcium carbonate, so it's just calcite. And it's not always light and fluffy. Sometimes these things are really hard and durable, but whatever. It's always calcium carbonate. So that's the common thing, and that's the term that gets used. And they look really weird. Now, this is actually not the exterior. These plates are not an exoskeleton, they are bones. There is a layer of flesh on the outside of it, there's a layer of like digestive tract and stuff on the inside of it, and all the gonads and stuff like that. And these are, yeah, from the middle layer, from the mesoderm, so roughly equivalent to the bones that you and I have. So, yeah, yeah, let's enjoy our bones. All right. Um, so, yeah, the earliest beginnings of the Echinodermata are all the way down in the lower Cambrian. We haven't found any really confidently identified echinoderms in the Ediacaran, although people have proposed. There's a thing that looks like it's like three curly little lines and it's on a little lump. It's called Tribrachidium. That's an Ediacaran fossil that some people have said might be an early echinoderm. Could be, but it's from Ediacara, and you know how Ediacara things get preserved, right? It's a death mask mold, so you can see what shape it was, and that is not enough to make the call. Unfortunately, the fossils that we get in the lower part of the Cambrian are mostly disarticulated. You have little pieces of parts of the skeleton, and just looking at a creature like this, if you were to find only one of those plates, I I don't think you would have any idea where to put that or what the rest of the organism should look like. This one is one of the more easy to interpret. It's almost bilaterally symmetrical, but I'll show you some of these others, and they are just weird, weird, weird. Yeah, which is why we love them. Echinoderms. You'll hear, like, I don't know, your elementary school teacher say they have five-fold symmetry. When you've seen those sea stars that have, like, I don't know, 7 arms or 20 arms or something like that occasionally. But even though it does often look from the outside as if we've got fivefold symmetry, there's this thing called Louvain's law. I don't know how you're supposed to say that. And the idea is that actually echinoderms have 2-1-2 symmetry. So like that. 2, then 1, then 2. So it's like bilateral symmetry, but not quite. So there's two things over here that are trying to be symmetrical to each other. One piece in the middle and two on this side. So yeah, it's like two different things which are the same as each other, and then one in the middle that's different from any of these others. And it ends up kind of working out to be kind of, sort of, almost, sometimes fivefold symmetry. But as you'll see in the early ones, the symmetry is not apparent. And it's maybe even better to think of these as asymmetric, although we now know from the genetics that they are using a lot of the same Hox genes that you and I use to achieve bilateral symmetry. And so it's just that they're using some of the same equipment in a different way, which I think is interesting. Yeah, okay, let's go. So there's a common set of words that we use. We're going to describe the plates around the sort of axis of pseudo-symmetry, if you want to call it that. And so the ones in the very center will be called either the central plate, or if it's divided up, it'll be called the infrabasal, like underneath the basal. The ones just outside of that are going to be called basal plates. The ones outside of that would often be called radial plates if we're talking about something like a crinoid. which is really like a starfish. So a starfish is like that, and a crinoid is just pulling those arms in basically and putting them on a stalk like that. Yeah, more or less the same creature, just expressed in a different way. Just imagine a stalk coming out from that part of a starfish, and you've got yourself a crinoid. Okay, here's what I was talking about. These are some of the weirdos. Yeah. And most workers in early echinoderms are very reluctant. Like, you read these papers and they are just really falling all over themselves to try not to put these things into an evolutionary hierarchy because they are just not sure. And I get where that comes from, and I'll show you, a couple of times that people have done this, and they could be right, but boy, it is hard to make sense of this. It's almost like you've got, I don't know, 10 or 12 different little crown groups in the early Cambrian that come from nowhere or somewhere that's maybe unmineralized, and then all of a sudden branch off and just keep branching. It's really wonderful. So down at the bottom end, you've got your helicoplacoids, and people put these at the bottom because they do not have they're not even trying to be bilaterally symmetric or radially symmetric, but they're almost a spiral symmetry. And so Helicoplacus, which is this one, actually has so to count the symmetry or pseudosymmetry on echinoderms, you're going to want to look for the ambulacra. Ambulacra are the little lines, and they're going to have a pair of tube feet on either side of the lines. And a tube foot is just something that can be inflated with water, and then it'll fill up, and then it's like a little octopus sucker. It'll hold on to stuff. They are used for mobility and for food gathering. Mobility in something like a starfish, you'll see them walking along. They're like little clear legs underneath the main arms. But there's a pair of them, and there's a little bubble at the end of that. And when that bubble is squeezed, then the water from the bubble will go into the little tube foot, and it will extend. And so by extending and retracting these, they're little hydraulic creatures. Isn't that neat? Anyway, so on a helicoplacus, they have an ambulacra that is the shape of a Y. So it's like one that then splits into two, which if you're thinking like 2, 1, 2, maybe. Could be. I don't know. Or if you're thinking fivefold symmetry, these two haven't split, these two haven't split, and that's the third one. I don't know. They make no sense. But then they're twisted all around the body. However, there is, I think it's called helicocystis. I don't know. It's in the side, which has a little stalk, like a little crinoid, basically. This one we think was rooted to the ground by the bottom plates, just sort of attached. Some of the ones that look like this have fivefold, or rather 5 ambulacral grooves that are spinning around. And all these grooves is a set of tube feet that are going to be passing food up toward a central mouth. So at the center of those grooves, there's always a mouth. And it's just a function of all the arms to push food down into the mouth. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, imagine how much you could eat if you had 5 hands working for you, or more. Yeah. Okay, then you got some other weirdos. You got some that have a little stalk, kind of like a crinoid, but they aren't really, they're way too early to be a crinoid. Their plates don't really fit together like crinoid plates do. And so they call these things eocrinoids, like dawn crinoids. And this Goggia right here would be a good example of that. That term is considered to be paraphyletic, which is one of these phylogenetic no-nos. It's probably got several different things that are not that closely related to each other, and it leaves out some other things that maybe should be in there and related to each other. So we'll still use it for Goggia in particular, which is literally this one, and we have several examples that you can see. Oh man, yeah, it hurts to use it. Yeah. Then you got this other term, rhombifera. And rhombiferans are going to be like an evolved version of an eocrinoid. They will often have 1 arm or 2 arms. I don't think there are any with 3 arms, but sometimes you get 4 arms. and they're going to have a sort of a little calyx here. But the neat thing here is that they're going to have this sort of muscular stalk. And so, whereas the stalk appears to be mostly just a holdfast, like a way to cement yourself down the bottom or lift yourself up. So you can do that ecological tiering thing where if I'm a little taller, I'm eating from a different part of the water column than someone that's a little shorter. Yeah. Um, but yeah, rhombifera are weird. That term may also be paraphyletic or polyphyletic. Yeah, it's there are probably problems there, but if we see big plates around an organism, then we can say, yeah, that's probably a rhombiferan. Next, you've got your edrioasteroids. So this is like if you took the top of a crinoid and you had no bottom of the crinoid and you just glued the top down onto something hard. Quite often a brachiopod, occasionally the substrate. You would have yourself an edrioasteroid. They have nice 2-1-2 symmetry. Isn't perfect. Symmetry is almost never perfect in echinoderms. I think it probably is never perfect in echinoderms, but they're trying. They're trying. Then you got these guys, Tenocystids, and we've got a fossil of one, and you can see it, and it's amazing. These have a little comb-like apparatus that looks like it could open and shut. They find some of these that are more and less open than each other. And these things did well in the mid to late Cambrian. And we think they may go back. These may be some of the earliest ones, although it depends who you're talking to. And like if you have one little circular plate, does it come from an eocrinoid, a rhombiferan? Is it, a sort of a rounded off helicoplacoid plate? You don't know. Nobody knows. I don't know. Somebody may know, but I don't know. That's for sure. Then you got some other groups. Cinctins are going to be like rhombifera, but rhombifera we think are more or less sedentary, but they can kind of wave their stalk around. I don't know what that does for you, but kind of muscular down here. Cinctins are going to actually move along the seafloor. So these are going to lay flat. Rhombifera are up in the air, and they're feeding with their little arms. Cinctins are like a rhombiferan that's decided to, boom, flop on the ground, and it's going to use its stalk as a means of locomotion. And there's some argument about whether they are using their stalk to pull themselves along or push themselves along. We think it's push now. I'll show you some of the experiments that led to that conclusion, and there are some trace fossils as well. Solutes are going to have, it's going to be basically a cinctin, but it's going to have a feeding arm on the top. So it's got a feeding arm up here, and it's got a sort of flopping along, a little floppy tail to move it along there. And so, yeah, going to swim along the bottom. Then you got your mitrates. Now, mitrates are going to have fewer and really big plates. They're like super armored, really thick. And these are also going to flop along the bottom, and they're going to push food into their mouth parts. Whereas you have a single anus that's usually up near the mouth, actually, on cinctins, and I believe on solutes, although we'll have to go check a picture of a solute. On mitrates, they're really not sure where the anus is. Yeah, is kind of shocking, but there are a couple little holes down here, usually in this part, the sort of motor of their little tail, and it is possible that those are actually sort of twin, I don't know, effluent escape channels of some sort. Yeah, you can't really have a Y-shaped gut, although maybe you can. Maybe now you can. I don't know. It could be that one is also for expelling waste from the water vascular system, and another is for expelling waste that was sort of taken in through the mouth. Hard to say, or there could be something else that we're not understanding, Echinoderms, early echinoderms are tough. They are really tough. So here are some of them. These are the terms that I want you to try to recognize. Helicoplacoid, 3 branches, like a Y, twisted. Yeah. Helicocystoid. This is going to have a stalk, and it's going to have 5 branches that twist around. Yeah. Edrioasteroid. That's the one where it's just you sort of cut the top off a sea urchin and you glue it to the floor. Yeah. They're like little carbuncles, little warts that live on other organisms for the most part. Yeah, little dome-like body. You got your eocrinoids, which have usually five-fold-ish symmetry. Yeah. You've got your, let's see, tenocystoids, which are going to almost, oh, it's tantalizingly close. They are so close to bilateral symmetry. And they're going to have a comb like apparatus. That's the Teno, just like in Teno 4, the comb jellies. Yeah. Um, yeah. And so they're freely living, but they don't have that little tail, no hind limb for propulsion. So the only way that I can think that they can actually propel themselves is with that tenoid organ. So it could kind of open up and sort of drag itself along while consuming food. Kind of like a self moving Pac Man, where the movement of the mouth actually moves the body. That would be real slow and pretty inefficient. And there are a lot of these fossils, but I don't see how else it could work unless there is a soft body component that is missing from the fossil record, which would have changed this outlook. Like maybe they had a soft, muscular tail somehow that for some reason had no bones inside of it. I don't know. We're making stuff up here. It's they are a mystery, but they're an adorable little mystery. The one that we have is about that big. That's the rock it's on. It's about, I don't know, quarter the size of the rock. Looks great under a microscope. Synctons. So yeah, the ambulacra are going to be absent. Yeah, on a syncton. They're like fully armored up. Or it's possible that they're little tiny ambulacra by the mouth, but it's even hard to spot where that could be. But like in brittle stars, so these are fully armored, and they actually armor over their tube feet. They're one of the, I think, the only extant echinoid that does have covered over tube feet, and they make little sort of spines out of their tube feet. They're very metal, yeah. Just in the sense that they're completely armored and spiky, like one of those punk dog collars. That's the vibe they're going for, basically. Let's see. Yeah, so Cincta, most commonly, the common ones you see will have two feeding arms, um, and presumably they had food-like function, like where they would scrape stuff down in toward the mouth, and then they also have a tail that will help them move along for propulsion. Got your solutes. They're gonna have one feeding arm at the top and one big long tail for like maximum speed. Very inefficient propulsion. You got your mitrates, yeah, which are the ones with completely armored, very big plates, whereas something like Syncton or a solute is going to have these little tiny plates, or a tenocystoid. It has like big plates around the edge, and then just the world's smallest little plates in the center. They're adorable, but they're really tiny. Cornutes are there. These are my favorite to look at. They have gills on the posterior, which is weird. They have like a little gill slit-like opening. We think that's what it is, but maybe it's more likely sort of a vent for the water vascular system. They do have a separate mouth and anus, which are going to be both up at the anterior, the front end. And they have one hind limb for propulsion, so they're a specialized version of like a tenocystoid or a syncton or a solute. Yeah, they're just doing it differently. But cornutes do not have movable arms, whereas a mitrate will have two movable arms. Um, uh, yeah, and solute will have one movable, flexible arm. Cornutes just have like fixed plates that will sort of channel the food in. As they are moving forward, food will be pushed toward their mouth. There's just a very passive eating system, and it probably uses less energy and is probably an evolutionary win in that sense. If operating in a limited energy, possibly limited oxygen environment is your path to success, then this might be one way to accomplish that. So rhombifera are going to have a stalk, and we think they are mostly sedentary and they're mostly sort of up in the water column and feeding. Although, yeah, the stalk looks a lot like the sort of propulsion limb you would get on a solute or a cinctin or a mitrate. So, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Then you got crinoids, and crinoids are going to have some multiple of 5 ambulacra containing arms, and sometimes those will branch off, and you'll have little sort of mini side branches that then funnel into the central branch. Yeah, they're great. The only one that's not on here, and we'll get to it in a later slide, but we ran out of room on this slide, is blastoid, Blastoid. And those are going to be relatives of crinoids, so they'll have their mouth and anus both right together up on the top face. Blastoids don't really they don't have arms the way crinoids do. Crinoids have these big, long, feeding arms. Blastoids is just like it's like a little nut is kind of what it looks like. They had small things like feeding arms on the side, but just dozens of these. But these are running down the ambulacral grooves, either side of it, essentially. And so it's kind of a different thing. And they leave great fossils. They are some of the most charismatic fossils of the Echinodermata, I think. You'll see. You'll see. You'll know when you see. All right. So, yeah. This is one attempt, and bless them for attempting to even do this. But this puts Tenocystoids down at or near the bottom. So the dotted line would be at the bottom, and the solid line would be this sort of group where they're sisters with cinctins and stylophorans are going to be things like mitrates and cornutes. Yeah, with solutes being a little more crinoid-like, and then splitting that into 5 arms. You got your crinoid. Notice what's not on here, though. No eocrinoids, no helicoplacoids, no helicocystoids, no edrioasteroids. And so they're trying to reconstruct at least part of the tree. But echinoderms are so hard. They are so, so difficult. And there's probably multiple lines of convergent and divergent evolution that are going on here. Just everybody's playing around with the skeleton, and it may be that the skeleton was not all that fixed, or it was relatively easy to change, only because it does change dramatically in relatively short amounts of time. Just wildly, wildly different. Yeah. Okay, so let's meet the groups. Yeah. Actually, let's pause here, and then we'll come back, and then we'll meet the groups. That's a good thing to do.